At Subway, start your day the flavorful way by adding new guacamole to your favorite breakfast sandwich. Perfectly made with a hint of jalapeno, our guacamole turns up the flavor to your breakfast. Try it today on a hot and toasty egg, white, and cheese. Subway, eat fresh.
The BS Report is a free-flowing conversation that occasionally touches on mature subjects. The BS Report. The BS Report with Bill Simmons.
Welcome to the BS Report, a hazy Tuesday here in Southern California. As promised, Chuck Klosterman on the line. One of our, probably has done the most BS reports of anyone I didn't go to college with, I'm going to say. I'm going to say you've done like 25. Is that possible?
Well, what about
Sal?
Old Lowe. He's done a lot of those.
Yeah, Zach's done a lot. I guess Sal. All right, I take it back. Well, you're in the top 10. How are you?
Sal, he's going everywhere. Good. I'm great. How are you doing? You're sick. You sound a little.
I'm sick, but I'm gonna go through it. Lots going on. As always, we need your counsel and your brain for everything. I don't even know where to begin. I guess we could start with Mayweather Pacquiao. Did you get the fight?
I didn't. I did not watch it. I was interested in it, kind of as an idea, but I didn't actually pay for it and watch it. I'm always kind of intrigued by the reaction to any of these things. It seemed like the overriding response was neither of these guys was trying to get hurt, and that's how it's like boxing is brutal, boxing is brutal, boxing is brutal. Why aren't those guys more brutal? It seems to always be the result of when people actually fight.
Right. It felt like an exhibition, and now I don't know what to believe because now Manny's saying he has a torn rotator cuff and has to have surgery, and there might be a rematch. It all feels very WWE. I don't like any of it. I gotta say.
Yeah, the whole thing, the entire thing. I'm not just saying the fight. I'm saying the many years leading up to it. It did seem like it's very far removed from sport. That it's just kind of this unique revenue stream that boxing has, and it made so much money. It's in some ways, boxing has just disappeared from the landscape, and yet you see the money they made from this. It's almost like, is boxing the one sport doing this right? That they can sort of have these events, and that covers everything. And the guys were old. They're not to say that they couldn't fight anymore, but they were much older than they should have been when they fought. Yeah.
I think it's interesting that Floyd has figured out how to kind of skip the middleman, which some people have done, totally different venue or whatever. But Louis C.K., I think, has figured out in his own way how to do that too. He goes right to the buildings. He sells out his own stuff. He posts his concerts on his own website and has figured out how to basically send the revenue stream toward him. And it's kind of what Floyd did with this fight. I felt like he figured out how to cut out as much of the middleman as he possibly could, which never happens in boxing. You know what I mean?
It feels like the main takeaway from this whole thing will be that it has galvanized the belief that Mayweather's a terrible person, and has sort of amplified or jump-started this idea that he's a genius. But these are the two things that people seem to remember about him now. It's that all this stuff about the domestic abuse, and there's something seems like almost unique or new about his relationship to money and self-promotion. Yeah.
I wonder if there was some point in his life when he just realized that he was going to embrace the villain and get attention that way. And it reminds me of Dennis Rodman in the mid-'90s when Rodman started coloring his hair and acting weird. Like he led the league in rebounds a couple of times, but nobody cared. And then he dyed his hair and people started caring. And then he got more and more tattoos. People cared. He started dating celebrities and kind of started, I don't know. He created this alter ego, basically, and it worked.
I guess the difference is, what's the worst thing that Rodman did? You could say, well, he kicked that cameraman, or he had a drinking problem, or he was, suicidal. With Mayweather, it's different. The worst things he's done are much worse. So it's less of a villainy construction as it is sort of almost an acceptance.
But at the same time, he was the best boxer pound for pound. Everybody thought so, and nobody really cared or had an opinion on it. And it only was when he started doing all that money stuff that, he got noticed and he became this polarizing figure. There was nothing polarizing about him in the mid 2000s. He was just this guy that boxing fans revered and nobody else really had an opinion on, and unlike Rodman, he not only has better villain tendencies, but also had, as you said, a couple incidents that make him even more unlikable. And now you have the Ray Rice video, and it's like this perfect storm. I can't remember a less popular great athlete. I'm sure there's been people, but it seems like if you're going to do low approval rating for athletes, he's got to be near the bottom, right? Of anyone we grew up with or have watched since we were adults.
Yeah, well, in that regard, he really is sort of pushing people to dislike him. I mean, when people question him about the domestic abuse and the response is no pictures, when you say there's no pictures, you're saying it happened, but there are no pictures. So it's not as though he is like he. I think there's been lots of people who sort of like the idea of being hated or whatever, but this is different. I mean, he's essentially saying that, I'm against society, like the rules of society. I'm breaking as part of my boxing promotion.
Yeah, and I think the way he treats people, which I've heard all kinds of different stories about the people like either in his life and security guards and whoever, he lives up to the villain aspect with all that stuff too. And I had Kimmel on yesterday because Kimmel went to the fight and was in Pacquiao's entourage, and he was talking about how every security guard was rooting for Manny and they all hated Floyd. And it made me think, like, this is a guy who just seems to embrace being unlikable. That's just who he is. He's really a sports movie character. You almost wouldn't believe the sports movie character, right? He's like, it's like what Clubber Lang was in Rocky III, but so much deeper and so much more going on with him and the decisions he's made. I'm amazed I'm just amazed by how fine he is with being disliked.
Though I suppose you can kind of insulate yourself in your own world, like in the silo he exists in. I'm sure it's an entourage of sycophants and people who use him for their revenue streams and the kind of people who just do not care what kind of person you are. They just want to be around greatness. And everybody else, like this whole massive humanity, they're just numbers, kind of. Like they have no relationship to him. So, he's almost, I think that I think we would both think to ourselves, oh, it would bother me somehow to have everyone hate me. But I think that he doesn't think of the word everyone in the same way that we do.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, he does have, I've seen him at Clipper games. He has these 4 giant guys with him that stand behind him in the courtside seat during halftime. Like anybody's going to bother Floyd Mayweather at a Clipper game. It's all very strange.
Also, I've been kind of calling him Merriweather through this whole podcast. I guess it should be, I'm saying his name wrong, aren't I?
Yeah, it's Mayweather.
Yeah, I know, but I think I've been saying Merriweather for some reason.
Oh, I thought it was you were doing some weird Dakota accent thing.
No, I think I was just saying it wrong.
Wait, so earlier when we were talking, you mentioned how people think boxing's too brutal, and then this fight wasn't brutal enough, and how hypocritical that was. Don't you think it's interesting that we spent these last 4 or 5 years just going nuts about concussions in sports, and whether it's football or soccer or hockey, whatever, concussion awareness has been a big thing, and people are always so worried about the safety of NFL players. And then this fight comes along. Everyone's like, hey, boxing, let's watch these guys beat the crap out of each other. Are we just all hypocrites?
I just think boxing is viewed as different. It's just viewed as football is still part of culture. It's still part of society. I don't think boxing's viewed that way anymore. I think that's for a variety of reasons. That is, I mean, it's very easy to avoid boxing, whereas those other sports are harder to avoid. The other sports also make such an effort to get casual fans involved. Yeah. Convincing people to play fantasy football or whatever, and suddenly then they're confronted with this thing on HBO telling them, they're watching real sports, and they're like, oh, am I somehow complicit in this? But boxing's not like that. I mean, there are people who describe themselves as a casual boxing fan. But I think all that means is that when a fight like this one happens, if they know someone bought it on pay-per-view, they will go to his house. There's just not a casual sort of relationship to it.
You watch a ton of college football. The draft just happened, and Winston and Mariota were the top 2 picks. And Winston, the Bucs made a big deal about how they talked to 75 people in his life, and then other people said, "Well, why didn't you talk to the woman who accused him of sexual assault?" And it just kind of, it was this sub thing going on during the whole Mayweather thing, and he's the number 1 pick, and they keep talking about off-field issues, and it's code for, hey, this guy was accused of a sex crime, and the administration decided that there wasn't enough evidence, which I guess is a really great way to say off-field issues. But don't you think it's strange? Like, you have the franchise number 1 overall pick, franchise quarterback. It's like the ultimate hope. You know, Andrew Luck, Peyton Manning, these guys that come into the draft, and it's like, oh my God, my football life's going to be different for 15 years. This is going to be amazing. And now you have, if you're a Tampa fan, you've never had a great quarterback. You have this guy who everybody says he just has it. He's just special. He just has a charisma about him. And yet he has all this baggage stuff. Like if you were a Bucs fan, how would you feel about rooting for this guy?
Well, I mean, I didn't root for him in college. I don't know why I would start rooting for him in the NFL. I mean, you're kind of creating this scenario where it's like, okay, assume I'm already invested in the success of the Buccaneers.
It's a hypothetical.
Yeah. Well, I think that he will probably be a better pro than Mariota.
Yeah.
I think that I think I would probably. I don't think I'd ever get on the bandwagon. I mean, I don't even know if it's not just the singular sort of accusation of the sexual assault. It seems to be just sort of the person that he is, which is accentuated by the way he kind of delivers interviews as if he is the nicest person, kind of the most kind of playful, kind of loquacious character. I mean, it's one thing if a guy, when you see him in a press conference, kind of seems kind of sullen and seems kind of dark, and then you kind of compare it with, the things you hear about him off the field, and you're like, well, maybe he just he comes from a different world where maybe the things that he values and his understanding of how the world works is different. But when he acts so like, I'm your buddy, and I'm just, so talkative and so kind, I'm joking around, I'm making references to Johnny Manziel and all of these things, then you hear these other things, it makes these actions seem conscious in a way that's much more troubling. That's sort of like he has the ability to sort of project this false image of who he is and then live this life simultaneously. So not only is he kind of a bad person, but he seems like the hypocrite. I guess that's what I don't like about him. I almost feel as though I would be less against him if he
he's more genuine,
seemed like a jerk.
Right. If he embraced his inner Floyd. I don't know what to make of him, because I feel like I'd be a hypocrite if I didn't mention. I do think we should cut people slack when they're in college a little bit, because I think everybody's an idiot in college. I'm not talking about the sexual assault stuff, but all the other stuff he did. These guys are idiots. Like I was an idiot in college. That's kind of what happens in college, and I'm not sure that means if it was just the other stuff. I'm not like the crab legs and things like that. I'm not sure that would make me pause. But then you had the other piece in it, and I don't know. I have a tough time with that story. Because,
well, the crab legs thing, it's very possible that was not the first time a member of that football team believed they were getting something for free at a grocery store. I would guess that is probably not uncommon. Yeah. In terms of jumping up on the table and saying something, idiotic, kind of reflecting this meme in the culture, that seems, I didn't even think that just seems like something that popular college kids might do. Kind of that didn't seem weird to me at all. I guess it does seem weird that there's a whole series of these things that are happening with his full awareness that this could damage a dream life.
Yeah.
So it's either that he doesn't seem to care about that dream life, which doesn't seem to be the case. It seems like he's interested in succeeding and being famous, or he believes that nothing he does will have consequences. And I can understand why one might come to that conclusion, having looking back on how his life has worked. I can see where he might have a skewed vision of what happens if you do terrible things.
Right.
As a player, I think we've talked about this before. I do think that does sort of resemble Dante Culpepper, and I think that's just a strange comparison because Dante Culpepper also sort of had both kind of poles of greatness and being terrible.
Right.
Is it a compliment to say someone's the next Dante Culpepper? I'm not sure.
He had a couple great seasons, and then he had a couple of bad ones too. The draft is it's pretty crazy that these are the top 2 picks, the top 2 quarterbacks, alleged franchise quarterbacks, and you just don't know. It's like you're in Vegas playing, I don't know, whatever, poker, and you have an 80% chance to win the hand, so you go in. 80% is a great chance. But really never, other than, I guess, luck, may have been 95%. I guess Manning was 95%. But, man, the quarterback, the franchise quarterback thing can go wrong in so many ways. I mean, there's been so many of them that have failed. And the pressure of being the savior and having that bullseye on your back and having to be the leader of the team when you're 22, I do think it's a lot to ask, and I do think that's part of the reason a lot of these guys have failed. I don't know what's going to happen with him. I mean, if he's as immature as he was in college in his rookie year, and he's throwing the ball up for grabs, everybody talks about how he, he's not careful with the football, which is the worst thing you can be in the pros. He might just be terrible next year, and he might have a couple more things, and then all of a sudden we'll be talking about him like he's Jamarcus Russell, or he could come in and be great. I don't know.
It would be awesome if Marcus Mariota was great, but the thing that makes me nervous about him is, okay, you already say how they always talk about the system he plays in as a quarterback, not being under center and not really calling plays and all of these things coming from Oregon. But kind of when you kind of even look at it from a larger kind of point, I mean, Oregon's been good now for how many years? More than 10? Have they been good for 15 years, could we say now, that they've had a pretty good program?
Yeah, seems like it, at least 15.
Who's the best offensive player they have produced? I guess it would be LeGarrette Blount.
Wow.
You'd think, I mean, who's better? Am I missing somebody? I might be. I'm just kind of saying this off my head, so I could be wrong. But I can't remember anybody that they produced. Maybe there's a lineman that I'm missing or something. It seems odd that you could have a program that good without, by chance, producing a wideout or something. It was a bunch of big years or something. So if Mariota ends up being as great as he seems to have the potential to be, he'll be not only the first kind of quarterback from there that where this worked, but the first player where this worked from that system. And then also, I guess it depends. Do you think Whisenhunt will change his offense now that he has him? Because he obviously doesn't want to run the kind of system in Tennessee that would take advantage of his gifts.
Well, you know where I stand. I always think you should graft your football system around the players you have, not just have a system and tell people to run it.
Yeah, so do you think he'll do that, though? Do you think that will happen?
He certainly doesn't have a good track record with young QBs. The most telling thing for me with Mariota was that Chip Kelly offered, by all accounts, a pretty luxurious package for him. It was 2 first-rounders, a couple more draft picks, Sam Bradford, a couple players. And he coached him. So, I think the fact that he was kind of inside, behind the curtain with Mariota and actually saw how he handled himself day after day and how he handled himself in practice and with his teammates, and he was so gung-ho and trying to get him, was interesting to me. That made me think he's going to be good. I don't know. I mean, and certainly Chip Kelly's been all over the map, but the fact that Chip Kelly felt that strongly about it, the Celtics had the same thing. Brad Stevens really wanted to get Gordon Hayward a year ago. And, because he'd been with him. He loves Gordon Hayward. And then Gordon Hayward stayed in Utah, had a really good year. I think he made a step up. But, I do think there's something to it. It'll be interesting. Mariota versus Winston.
Kelly is all over the map, kind of, but I would say near the upside more than the downside of that map. I mean, he kind of makes strange moves, but thus far, in that first year, he seemed like he drafted guys who he had played against in the Pac-12. Like, he didn't draft his own guys. He drafted guys that he had seen, that he'd watched on film, I guess, a lot. Well, I can see what this guy can do.
That's always dangerous.
Well, although, to me, less dangerous than a guy who drafts his own players, even though, I mean, like, that's kind of what Jimmy Johnson did in Dallas, and that worked. But for the most part, I would think a guy who drafts the people he played against means that he consistently saw them causing a problem on film that he was like, this will be a problem for anyone. Whereas the guys you're actually with, I'm sure you get emotional ties and you think to yourself, well, I've seen him do this one specific thing. If I can get this one specific thing into our system, that will work. I sort of thought the idea of him picking opponents was a reflection of him being smart, but
the Patriots do something interesting. And this is something they've started doing the last few years. They like getting guys who are like leaders of their team. They took this safety from Stanford in round 2, who Kuiper was just stupefied. He thought he should have gone 4th or 5th round. And like, of course, the guy's like was a captain at Stanford, 3-year starter. And it just seems like the Patriots like having these guys who have been in winning programs, putting them in theirs. Guys who have had success. I don't know if that's a strategy that could be copied, but I do like how some of these different teams have like these little quirks that they seem to drift toward in the draft. I watch the draft every year, and I don't even know why. Because I'm just like, oh wow, speed receiver sounds great. Like, you just don't know. It's the dumbest but most enjoyable thing. I think the dumbest but most enjoyable 4 hours of TV.
It is like, weird, and it's like that is one event that you totally can follow on the internet because you can imagine in your mind a man in a suit's coming up to a podium. Now a bigger man is coming on stage to shake his hand. But when I'm home, I watch it too. I don't know why. I guess it's just a continuation of unknown moments. And that doesn't happen very often in television.
I think it's fascinating that these guys know this much about the draft because you're talking about knowing everything there is to know about 250 guys, something like that. I've done the NBA draft for the last 2 years, and really, you're talking about 30 guys. You have to, and even like slicing it down, you really want to be prepared for about 15 guys. Then the next 15 guys, you want to know something about them. And then when you get to the second round, you're just talking about little thumbnails for each guy. And every year I've had a couple sleepers, things like that. For football, though, I think it's so hard to just on the fly, somebody to be drafted. Kuiper has to remember the team he's going to, what their needs are, how they would use a player like him. Is this guy good? How do you do in the combine? It's like, do you think there's anything left in his brain to even think about anything else? Like, does he watch Game of Thrones? What does Mel Kiper do 24 hours a day?
Yeah, I don't know. I suppose it's just, if that's the only thing you think about, and you're essentially, with all these guys, no matter whether it's Kuiper or anybody from any magazine, it's always like, here's the player, here's his 4 or 5 best attributes. Here are the 2 or 3 knocks against him. I suppose, you talk to people who've watched him play, and they all kind of roughly say the same thing. And the only thing about draft analysis years later are the things that seemingly make no sense in retrospect. Like, I remember there was when Karl Malone was getting drafted, right. I remember people mentioned how one of the things that they said was his problem was low vertical jump, that he wasn't a good enough jumper, which seemed to have essentially no impact on his career whatsoever in any situation, But all the other details about him, I don't remember what they said.
Yeah, and that was a weird year because everybody was trying to get centers because, like, the center was a big thing at that point. Everybody's trying to load up on centers. All of a sudden, Karl Malone drops to whatever. My thing is, if it's a forward like that putting up 27 and 10 or whatever he was doing in college, odds are he's not going to be a bust. I always think it's funny when the guys after everybody misses on Karl Malone, And then a few years later, there was a guy, Randy White, who was terrible. And they're like, he's the next Karl Malone. Like that's another thing with the draft. They have to like compartmentalize all these different people. What TV are you watching?
Well, okay, I want to talk about television, but there's one thing I want to ask you sports-wise first before we go over there.
Let's do it.
I guess from what I've heard you say elsewhere that you would like to see a rule change in terms of the intentional following. Early in quarters and all that.
The hack-a-shack, hack-a-DJ, all that stuff. Yeah.
So what do you propose that they do? Like, I mean, I think that I've been intrigued by seeing, like, Adam Silver talk about this and sort of the number of people who are pretty strongly against it for like a very kind of almost ethical reason. We must keep free throws in the game, and it's something you can't just erase this part of the game. And yet, if we're viewing this as and at the pro level, it absolutely is a form of entertainment. It makes the game not necessarily less interesting, but definitely less entertaining. So, what do you think that they should do?
So initially, I hated hack-a-shack, hack-a-DJ, and I thought what they should do is either interpret it differently, like they do with the clear path foul, where if you feel like somebody's being intentionally fouled away from the ball, you get a free throw and you get to keep the ball.
Yeah.
And then I was thinking, could you do it where the team just gets to decline the foul shots? It's like, you know what, we're fine. We don't want the foul shots. We'll keep the ball. Thought that would be interesting. But after watching that series and going to the Clippers-Spurs games,
that scenario, though, creates almost even a more nightmarish possibility where, say, then a team goes, okay, we're going to keep following him until you agree to let him shoot. And, sure. we're going to take the three guys, the end of our bench. We're going to use up 18 consecutive fouls, in a matter of 3 possessions. We're going to follow him 2 seconds into the shot clock every time. Until you agree, we're just going to let, DeAndre shoot these or whatever. Because that would seem like a farce.
Well, I'm stubborn. I hate changing my mind on stuff. I felt pretty strongly that they should come up with some rule because when something's not fun, you got to get rid of it. But the more I watch and the more I talk to people and hear different opinions, it's really only like 7 or 8 guys who can't shoot free throws who matter, especially in the playoffs. And Game 7, it was a real part of the game, and it should matter that DeAndre can't shoot free throws. And it ended up, Doc did one of the ballsiest things I've seen him do. He took him out in the last 5.5 minutes. He put in Matt Barnes, and he went small, gave up defensive rebounding, gave up rim protection because he didn't want to risk having DeAndre on the other end. It wasn't just that he was missing the free throws, but it really knocked them out of the flow of their offense, and they had a nice rhythm going. And when you think about it that way, like he's a free agent coming up, right? Like let's say they created a rule that basically made his terrible free throw shooting irrelevant. Now all of a sudden you would pay him $120 million.
Yeah.
So I don't know if he should be rewarded for just being awful at free throws. Like, how about this? Just make them.
This is why it's complicated, and that's why it doesn't make it makes the game less entertaining, but it doesn't necessarily make it less interesting. That's a great example of it. I mean, that Game 7 was the best game that's been in a while, right?
Yeah.
Okay. And I think that's part of the reason why, because there was like this chess element to it, where you're removing one of your best guys for this one flaw in his game. But if a lot of players had one flaw that's significant, they couldn't play either. Like if there was a guy who literally could not stop a guy from going baseline on him every time, you couldn't play him. You couldn't have him on the floor getting beat every possession.
Scott Van Pelt made this point. If a third baseman threw it into the stands every time somebody bunted,
mm-hmm.
should we then change the rule to help this guy?
Yeah.
No. How about this? Learn to throw to first base. So I've kind of come around. I hope they don't change it. It's terrible to watch. Maybe there's something where in the regular season they could come up with a wrinkle, but in the playoffs they don't change anything. But
what if it was reversed? What if you couldn't do it in the flow of the game, but you could do it during the last 3 minutes of the game? So then you'd have to make the decision: are we going to leave the guy on the floor or not?
I had a column that went up today about Duncan, and it was a little bit of a retro diary of that game. If DeAndre had been in and they had fouled him in the last 5 minutes of that game with how intense and electric that game was, I don't know where his free throws would have gone. I've seen him shoot some terrible ones. I've seen him hit the backboard and have it come off and not hit the rim. I've seen him airball. I've seen him left, right, it doesn't matter. I think it was so tense in there, I really don't think there was any chance he would have made him. And then conversely, Duncan, who has always been kind of an up-and-down free throw shooter, and in this series was 50% and just wasn't making them. They were line drives in the front of the rim. And then he gets fouled with 8 seconds left. And, man, I mean, everybody's just going crazy, screaming at him, and he just comes through with these 2 line drives that go in. It was just – he's just so money. That was an incredible game. It really was. It was just incredible. It was one of the best games I've ever been to.
Yeah, I'm not a Clippers fan. I find that team to be incredibly unlikable, but just watching Chris Paul in that game was pretty amazing. Because not only can he obviously get his own shot, he can get a real good shot most of the time. Like he can get the ball down where he's pulling up from 9 feet, and that last shot he made at the end, obviously that's not a traditional good shot, but it's a shot he could make. He just played great. I mean, that was the best I've ever seen him play. And
Blake Griffin too, who kind of became the guy I think every Clipper fan wanted him to be in these 8 playoff games so far. He was awesome last night too. He's the least likable guy on the team, but he is good now. And I used, for a period there, I think I might have even said this in one of these podcasts. It was like, he can't hit jump shots. Why would you? But now he can. He knocks down shots and he plays super hard, obviously, and he's figured out how to use his athleticism in really competitive playoff games, which is kind of one of the last pieces for him. There were moments in that game where he just had the ball. He's like, I'm careening to the basket. I'm probably going to get fouled, And before, especially his rookie year, second year, his mindset was always, I want to dunk on people. That's what I want to do. I want to dunk on somebody and be on YouTube. That's my goal. Now his goal is all centered around how can I win this game. And I got to say, I think he might have a higher ceiling than I thought he did, because watching him at the top of the key doing basically point forward stuff, only LeBron out of anybody that size can do the stuff that Blake does. So now I'm starting to wonder,
well, but he can't get that much better though, because he's maxed out physically, and that's such a part of his game.
I know, but he's putting up 24, 13, and 8. Hey, you're not getting any better than that anyway. He's putting up huge numbers, and he's getting to the basket. I'm thinking, the Olympics is only 2 years away. The Olympic team is suddenly, the whatever lineup we're going to have in that thing is one of the secretly fascinating what ifs that's going to happen. Who starts in that team? Who's the crunch time guy? Does Curry start or Chris Paul start? I don't remember having this many. What the hell are they going to do? Choices with an Olympic team, Every 4 years, you always kind of know who the guys are, Now it's I don't even know.
Seem possible that in an Olympic situation you could move Curry over to 2?
Yeah,
I think you could play him with Paul. That's what I would do. But of course, I'm not in this position. Okay, so television now. Okay.
Yeah, television. Mad Men's got 2 episodes left.
Yeah. Well, I want to preface what I'm about to say by saying Mad Men is my favorite show on right now. It's the one I'm most interested in watching. I think I've seen 98% of the entire run in real time. I've watched it as it's happening. But I really feel they're choking down the stretch here. I feel that this has been by far the weakest season of the show, and that they have made some pretty big narrative mistakes.
Should we throw a spoiler alert right now? Let's do a little spoiler alert for people who aren't caught up on Mad Men. Spoiler alert. Okay, keep going.
Okay, but this I'm not even talking about. I won't think I'll say anything that specific. But what I'll say is that that first season was really about Don and Peggy, and you had this great ensemble around them. And you'd be like, oh, this Joan character is great. I wish we could see a little more of her. Or every scene Roger's in. He's hilarious. And Pete Campbell, intriguing, But it was still basically about their 2 stories. And now all these peripheral characters have become, people like them so much that it's almost as if Matthew Weiner almost views like they all need to have some sort of kind of personal resolution. And the fact of the matter is, they're absolutely unstoppable as supporting players, but their own stories are not as good. It's like that. There's the stuff about Joan this year has not been interesting. Roger is not as he doesn't bring things to scenes the way he used to, because I feel like if they had made the story simpler and not had Don Draper have this existential crisis, I think what they're doing with Peggy is pretty good. But I would have pretty much made this last season about those two people, and everybody else would just sort of contribute to their stories. Because I don't really feel like there has been an especially good episode during this final run. Some people really liked the one from, not the last one, but one previous to that, but I just don't see it. That used to be a show where even the week episodes were pretty great, and that has not been the case.
I think they made a crucial mistake when they split up the final season. And how many episodes did they end up doing? Like 14 instead of 10?
Yeah, there's 7 in this one.
Yeah, and there's 7 in the last one. And, this is a show that was, I think, cranking out 10 episodes per season. And that's how you get to what you just talked about, how the supporting characters are kind of getting the ball too much. It's almost like if Doc Rivers was like, hey, I'm going to get Matt Barnes some shots. It's like, no, we're good with Matt Barnes. He's just going to run around and play defense and shoot a couple of threes. We don't want to know Matt Barnes' story. I'm with you. I think Don and Peggy are the Chris Paul Blake, like those are your meal tickets. That's been the heart of the show this entire time, and how she grew in the last 10 years from what she was to what she is now. How it ties in with everything that was going on in America, and at the same time how he kind of his time has passed and he's becoming not cool, and that to me is the show. And I'm with you. Roger Sterling is fun. Like, Roger Sterling comes off the bench and he gets a couple rebounds and makes you laugh, and then he goes away. I don't really need to dive deep into Roger Sterling.
Yeah, the layoff between like breaking the season up, that didn't bother me so much. I mean, like, it does seem that there was at least the indication that a lot happened in that gap, that sort of their business changed entirely or whatever. It more has to do with it. It just doesn't seem as though the show it seemed that it was so clearly about things initially. I mean, like, and I'm not saying a show has to have this super direct, hit you over the head purpose, but I mean, like, the beginning of this show, it was about, like, who is this Don Draper, this person who literally reinvented himself, sort of as a metaphor for the way lots of people reinvent who they are, but he actually became someone different. And then we had this woman who was who because of the circumstances of time, had the ability to become something great, but was slotted as a secretary and pretty much had to find ways to fight through this, sort of using the passage of time as a ladder, because things changed and she took advantage of these things. And, and like, my favorite character to watch is Pete Campbell, but I liked when I was always wishing I saw him more, sometimes I think that the popularity of this show has kind of hurt it in some ways, because I feel like the producers of the show are too aware of kind of the special thing that they made, and because of it, maybe they just think, well, I want to answer every question, and I want everyone to be part of this, and it's been disappointing to me.
That happened in Lost too. I think they were reading the stuff written about them too much, and it started to affect the decisions they made with the show. Like, that was the first show where that became the principal problem they were having. Right.
They were just too involved. Like, I'm not sure that they're necessarily, like, reading recaps or whatever, and like, that's how it felt with Lost. I think those guys were. I don't think there's any question those guys were. I think those guys were reading everything that everybody wrote about that show. Oh, definitely. Yeah. Because it was this weird scenario where the people making a show came out of the world of the kind of person who would be a commenter on a recap. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
Like they were very much like their audience, and so it was exciting that this was happening, at first, and then it just kind of destroyed the whole thing. Mad Men's different because it's like Matt Weiner seems to have a real adversarial relationship with his audience. Like, he doesn't seem to be pandering to anyone, but he can sense that he's made sort of a different kind of show that seems to speak to people on many different levels, and is going to be remembered, and has this kind of interesting significance, and has now sort of a political aspect to it. And because of that, maybe he feels like, I can literally do whatever I want. Like, it doesn't matter if this makes the show worse. I want this to happen. Like, I want these things to happen. And in a way, I guess that you respect someone for having that kind of artistic vision. But as the consumer, I wish that it was the way it used to be.
The first season is so carefully thought out, and it's so smart, and there's just all these little nuances within it. Like, I remember there was one episode, Don and Betty and the kids, like, they went and had a picnic at the park.
Yeah.
And they finished, they just left all the in the park.
Yeah.
It was like a lot of stuff like that where you're watching it, but you're also going, oh, yeah, that isn't that crazy that stuff happened back then? And I feel like that part of the show has kind of slipped too.
Like, not only did that, like, in a way, that's actually how it was back then. You could just kind of throw your garbage away, but also, like, is this essentially the story of the last 40 years of America, where people, like, just, are just now realizing that you can't take a culture and just sort of dispose of it wherever. That was the kind of thing that I think made people think this show is different. That there's something different happening in this, that it's entertaining, but I want to talk about it or whatever.
Yeah, and then this last season, a lot of that stuff feels forced to me. The way he did it, the first couple of seasons, was just so seamless. Just little tweaks and nuances and nudges, and be like, oh yeah, oh that's great, oh that's so smart that they thought of that. And now I feel like I always judge stuff by, like, I'll have my iPad out, and if I'm really into a show, I won't look at my phone or my iPad. I'm just locked in. These last two half seasons of Mad Men, I've been, like, making fantasy baseball changes, looking at Twitter, just kind of the show's on. I'm not really into it.
I didn't feel this way about the last half season. I was, and this is like a weird thing to say, but even while I was watching the first few episodes of this season, I liked the show so much that I was trying to convince myself that I wasn't having this reaction. Like, I found it not as good, but I was like, well, maybe that just means I'm not getting something. And I was kind of working up all of these, like, explanations for why what I was taking in didn't seem as enjoyable. But particularly with this last one on Sunday, I was just like, the show's not as good as it used to be.
There's one other bigger problem that we didn't mention. Like, you talked about how much you like Peggy's arc, and I think Peggy is the best character on the show right now, and the most interesting one. Don, who was the heart of the show, who the first couple seasons was just the leading man in every respect, had the mystery, almost every plot seemed to go through him somehow. And he's kind of tapped out. You gotta say, it's like, all right, hey, there's another brunette that Don's gonna fall in love with who can't fix him, and I don't, and it's like, hey, the advertising world's passed him by. It kind of led to Matt Weiner sends him in this car just driving toward Wisconsin. I almost felt like because Matt Weiner didn't know what to do with him anymore. It's like, I'll send him on a car trip. He'll go. Like, really, ultimately, what did that car trip accomplish? He goes to see if Diane the waitress is there. We already knew she had a ton of baggage and was bad news and all that stuff. And he finds out, and it was this whole arc that led to a moment that I already knew 2 episodes ago. I don't think they know what to do with him.
Yeah, well, you'd mentioned Lost earlier, and okay, Mad Men begins the series with the central question being, Don has this secret. He's someone else. Will other people find out? Will his wife find out? And what does it mean that he's done this? And then it was resolved. Okay, in the same way that Lost began with, like, here are these polar bears and these weird numbers and all
Yeah.
the, it's like, and they were never able to sort of to reconcile that. Where, to the credit of Mad Men, they were. Like, they essentially had what seemed like the totality of a story. Like, his experience going from, Whitman to Draper, and then, and then he was discovered, and it turned out that no one really cared or whatever. And then they kind of just put that aside, and the show became something else that was just as good, But now, in this last stretch, you almost have to get back to that beginning problem. Like, you need him to you need the Draper character to be once again dealing with identity and the idea of actual identity. Not like, am I successful in my job, or, am I too old to be cool? Those are real minor issues. Like, he should be grappling with this idea of, if I'm not who I originally was, am I actually no one or whatever? And maybe that's what's going to happen. Maybe that somehow this trip west is the beginning of that. I feel like, I think my wife mentioned this, but does it make a point of he has a Social Security card with him when he starts driving west? Is that true? Do you remember this?
I don't remember this. I was probably looking down at my iPad.
Yeah. So maybe that is going to occur, and that's what the end of this is going to be. But there's not a hell of a lot of time left to deal with this stuff. And
well,
while
as
the
you said, the Don Peggy thing, they're never going to be in the same scene again. They were the heart of the show. He's just going to be in the West Coast. I'd find that hard to believe.
Well, and then the first season they weren't often in the same room either.
Right.
And then there was that, like the episode "The Suitcase" or whatever, that was really like the real nexus of those two sort of storylines. But I mean, I hate when people sort of like ruin shows.
I know, pick it apart. No, I'm with you.
Yeah, I'm going to watch these last two episodes when they happen. I'm going to miss the show when it goes off the air. But I just feel like if I was writing about this show, I would have to say that it has been so much less successful than everything it had done prior to this.
Well, the one thing that it's had some genuinely funny moments, which is the one thing it hasn't lost. Like Pete Campbell trying to get his son into the prep school, and the 300-year history, and Lou Avery, and there's been some really funny moments. It's one of the few shows that makes me laugh out loud when it's doing it right. But I think the one thing that he really whiffed on, and maybe it was just because of the characters and who they're around every day, was just how things were changing for blacks from 1960 on. It's really just told through the story of a couple secretaries. It feels like it was juicy. It was juicy fodder there for something, and they kind of whiffed on it.
But see, that's a different kind of show, then, though. Then you're really changing the show entirely, because they're essentially placing this in an entirely white world, and then I think that there's a certain kind of person who goes like they need to be addressing race or whatever, almost as if it almost works like a kind of reverse engineering, where a certain kind of person says, because this show is great, and because it seems to be dealing with important ideas, you must also include my important ideas. And if you don't, that's a fatal flaw. I think that this, you saw this happen to a degree with Girl, that once there was an awareness that this show was having a larger cultural impact than logic would dictate, partially because just of the name of the show, because of the personality at the center, sort of the newness of the language in it or whatever. There was this, people suddenly were like, this show it matters, everyone's talking about this. So if it matters, it's got to deal with everything that's important. And that really hurt that show too. Every attempt that they did to push in ideas that weren't organically sort of, it's like, they didn't have any black friends or whatever. I'm not sure characters like that necessarily would be spending a lot of time with black people. I don't see that in New York. I see that this is the most, multicultural place in the country, and yet when I see people at bars sitting together, it seems to mirror more the first season of Girl than subsequent stuff,
Well, here's what I would have done with Don Draper. Don can't keep his hands off the staff. He always gets involved with women he shouldn't be with. instead of like the 17th brunette who might secretly be bad news that he gets involved with, there could have been one episode where it was a black secretary and they kind of had a fling, and then we went into her world for an episode. I would have been so much more interested in that than Diana the waitress, is my point, I guess.
Well, yeah. I mean, I guess there's no reason that couldn't have been done. They could have had certainly interesting conversations, but there again, it seems to almost shift the show more into like a consciously political allegory for something, you know.
So you think Don going back to Vietnam to join in the fight would have been too much of a push too? Well, maybe the last two will be great. I will say though, I don't like that we live in a culture where the showrunners give interviews with people. I hate it. I wish the showrunners never talked. It's like, you know, I just wish they don't give any interviews. Just keep some mystery around it. I don't really care what you were thinking with episode 4. Like, just shut up. Go away. Let me interpret the show that you created and the vision you had. Let me watch it and interpret it my own way. I don't need you to tell me how I should be thinking about the show. You know?
It's interesting you mentioned this, because before this season of Mad Men, I was asked, and very flattered to be asked, to interview Matt Weiner and January Jones and Don Draper and you know, Joan and Roger. You know, it's like on stage at the Kennedy, or like I think it was it was downtown. It was in Midtown somewhere. I can't remember now. It was on stage, you know, and I was interviewing these people on stage, and it was kind of difficult because, like, you know, it's hard to ask actors about the motives for their character because they're sitting there with Matt Weiner, who kind of put the script together. Their motives are the ones he designed, sort of. And
right.
So he did most of the talking. But you know what ended up being the most interesting exchange, in my view? At one point, just sort of casually, I asked how many members of the cast smoke in real life. You know, because they're always smoking on air.
Yeah.
I was like, what do you think the response was?
I would say just one.
Weirder. Refused to answer.
Really?
Did not give the answer. Said that nobody could smoke on the show unless they had smoked in real life, because he didn't want you know, any fake smoking, you know, because that does look, you know, preposterous kind of. But like refused to comment, and none of the participants commented on it. It's odd. Like, I wonder why that, you know, and they kind of acted almost as if it was an inappropriate personal question.
Wow, it's like PEDs in the NBA. Just don't even bring it up. Nobody can know. You're into Game of Thrones too, right?
Yeah, I watch it, definitely. But I watch that in a totally different way.
Why?
Well, because when Mad Men is good, things happen in that show that make me think of my own life. Like sometimes there will be interactions between people in that program that seem close to me in a way that you know, almost makes me feel fortunate that I was able to see a fictional depiction of some you know, problem or whatever. I never feel that way in Game of Thrones. And you know, Game of Thrones, I just sort of watch within the hour that it is on, and you know, it's always entertaining, pretty much. Some storylines are better than others, but if you ask me right now to really explain what's going on, I would use the fuzziest language possible. You know what I mean? I have a broad idea of what's supposedly happening here, but I don't even think it matters. Like, yeah. I feel it's pretty rare that there are moments in the show that fall apart unless you really know the details of what's happening. And, you know, they're pretty good about having characters give one kind of over-expository line of dialogue that doesn't seem super forced, that gives you a sense of, like, oh, so this relates to that story or whatever, you know?
I'm with you. I watch it a different way. I don't I think you could watch it one of two ways. Like Chris and Andy and Jason and Grantland, like they're in. You know, they would get a 100 on whatever quiz for the season of Game of Thrones. So I was like, who's this guy? Where is this guy? I just watch it, you know, and I know that, hey, there's the Lady of the Light, you know, hey, there's Jon Snow, hey, there's the girl who's Arya growing up, trying to make things happen. Yeah. Hey, there's Queen Cersei. That's just kind of how I watch it. You know?
Okay, this is going to sound maybe more insulting than it is. It's not my intention, but like, here's the thing: like, Game of Thrones is an amazingly put together narrative. I mean, I haven't read those books, but I have no doubt that they're great. I think that the transfer to the television show has been done a great job, because it's just so rare that you see people who love books also love like the film or movie or the TV show about them as much as fans of the book seem to, you know. But to me, there's a certain like lack of necessity to really know what's going on, because this is still some goofball fantasy, right? I mean, there's dragons flying around, there's giant, like I don't really care, you know. It's like, it's gonna, if I figure out exactly what's going on, it's still like this pretty absurd scenario. So it doesn't seem to require, I mean, you can certainly watch it in that way, like the people who really get into Star Wars and the alternative galaxies and all that, I think that gives pleasure to a lot of people. And there's certain things, not like, I'm not like kind of a weirdo about things, that I get obsessed with stuff and learn more than I need to or whatever. But when I watch Game of Thrones, I don't feel as though my lack of understanding about what's happening in this completely fake world really matters.
It does a really good job of introducing new characters or a character that we've seen, but then is all of a sudden getting a little more shine. And within like 2 scenes, it's just so concise and well done how they do it. Like the new king. You know, I didn't really have an opinion on him before this episode. And then, you know, it's like, this kid might be a peacetime president. I'm not sure this kid's going to be able to handle it. There's really only 2 scenes, but they're so smart with how they cast the show and how they write it that I really enjoy it. I just kind of turn my brain off and watch it. I know.
Yeah, I mean, I follow, I guess, the Lannister stuff pretty closely, because those are all such great characters. I mean, Cersei is an amazing character and an amazing actress. Peter Dinklage is very good. And, you know, it's like, you know, everybody involved there is good, and their interaction is so great that it's almost like their ability sort of to emote and deliver their lines sort of makes what's going on there more clear. Like, I understand that family in a way I don't understand the other families as much. And the other thing that is just great about that show, I guess, is that it's a fantasy, but they really get into the idea of, I guess, this is kind of an oxymoron, but like realistic fantasy.
Yeah.
Like, it's in a fantasy world, but they were really conscious to get kind of into the nuts and bolts of it, like how gross it would be to live in this fantasy world. Yeah. I think the violence helps with this, in that it sort of makes a supernatural place feel like Detroit or something. You know?
Well, like when I watch Louis, I'm like watching every morsel of every scene. Like, I'm just fascinated by Louis. I'm fascinated by him. I'm really interested in the choices he makes each episode and what the reasons are. And he's also pretty quiet about the show itself, so you never really know what he's thinking when he's doing episodes. And for me, that's like a totally... Like, if I had the same concentration I have for Game of Thrones that I do for Louis, I'd probably know all 50 people that are going on. But Louis is also an easier show to watch. It's one person. It's 22 minutes or 25 minutes.
Well, but the other thing about Louis episodes, you go into them, you have no idea what the show is going to be.
Yes.
Like, it might not be funny at all. It might be hilarious. It might seem like a 1976 sitcom. You know, it's like you have no idea what it's going to be like. I think for pure funniness right now, though, I think the funniest show is probably Veep.
Yeah, I don't watch that one. Everybody wants me to watch that one.
Well, it's been good in the past, but I just think that the jokes per square inch this year are just unstoppable. I mean, like, it's almost like the height of 30 Rock, where jokes come super fast. But the difference is these jokes are incredibly mean. Yeah. Like, I mean, 30 Rock was a playful show. It was charming, sort of. The things people say in this show are just incredibly mean-spirited. Silicon Valley is also really good now. I mean, those two shows, I think no one watches them live because they're watching Mad Men, but I think that they're really great things. I'm trying to think of what else I'm watching.
What was your takeaway on the Sinatra doc? I know you watched it.
Oh, I watched it. Well, okay. Here's something that's just kind of a reflection of my stupidity. I thought it was a 2-part documentary. So I watched the first part of the documentary, what I thought was the first part, and I was like, this is great. Now the second part is going to go into the real unseemly stuff. And then I was like, oh, my DVR didn't tape the second part. And then I realized there was no second part. That was the whole thing. So
there was a second part. They did too. It was 4 hours.
See, okay, then great. Then I missed the second part. Now, what was in the second part?
Oh, the second part was so much better than the first part.
Okay, well now I've got to reverse my whole position. I thought that there was going to be 2 parts, and then there wasn't.
No, second part's real. I liked it more. I mean, I thought it was probably 45 minutes too long. The documentary. I think he could have done it in 3 hours, and I feel the same way about documentaries that I do with autobiographies. I never care what happened to the person when they were like age 0 to age 17. Like, just take it when things get interesting. I always skip that. But once he gets to like Rat Pack and his son getting kidnapped, all that's like it really takes off.
Great. Now I got to go back and find this. Well, now now my opinion has reversed back to my initial take, which was that maybe this documentary is going to be what I thought it was going to be. When did the second one air? The following, like the next day or something?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay, I must have thought it was going to air the following Sunday, and when I saw it wasn't there, I was like, I'm not up on stuff like that anymore. Like, I don't follow the details the way I used to. Hence, me calling Floyd Mayweather Floyd Merriweather.
You had a child. What? You had a child.
I do have a child, but then I'm just less. I just keep up on things like that way less.
What's the best book you read in 2015?
The best book I read in 2015. Let me think. This is a tough one because I'm writing a book right now, so almost all the books I'm reading are related to the one I'm writing. So I'm not really sitting down a lot and reading books straight through.
Have you talked about what your book's about?
Yeah, let's not talk about it yet.
That's what I missed when I did the NBA book. I loved reading all the books that I had to research for the NBA book. So some of them were so terrible, like Bob Pettit's autobiography, Rick Barry's autobiography. It's you go into that world.
Your perception of books changes so much when you read that way because when I'm reading books for research purposes, I don't care about the writing at all. Right. I just want information that I haven't seen before or that clearly illustrates the thing I'm trying to understand. So, when you're reading a book for pleasure, you'll be like, oh, this book had, it's kind of interesting, but the writing is kind of hacky or whatever. I never feel that way when all I care about is the content. In some ways, and it makes me think like, is this actually how I should always be reading? Like, should I always be focused on literally things I have not seen before, or that nicely explain something, simply explain something in a way that's totally detached from like the skill of the person putting it together? Because that's maybe just kind of an illusion.
So just idiot guides and oral histories. Just read that could be your next 6 months of internet reading. So over all stuff that cuts stuff down to the nuts and bolts. I always find like I read on the internet. I read mostly for information. I'm just trying to learn stuff.
Yeah, because people on the internet read vertically instead of horizontally. Yeah. So if you're reading on the internet and something is just running in place, you just move your head down to the next chunk. Like, but when you read books, of course, you read horizontally. So you're kind of like, here's one. Okay, this isn't, I don't know if this is the best book I read this year. I just finished, this is kind of like, people listening to this podcast might be interested. I just read this book that's coming out about Van Halen called Van Halen Rising, about the early days of Van Halen. Oh. And it's written by this academic. And I got to say, it is pretty rare to find such a comprehensive prehistory of any band, even the Stones or something, some canonical band. So when it's about Van Halen, it's nuts. I mean, like the amount of he had seen. It appears that he interviewed several people whose relationship to Van Halen is just that they were kind of rich kids in the Pasadena area who had parties when their parents weren't home. Like that's like the amount of that he gets into in this, and there's a lot about sort of Eddie Van Halen's technological know-how, like how he when he played his guitar, he needed the amplifier to be all the way to 10 to get the tone he wanted. But of course, if he did that, you couldn't hear the bass and the drums and the vocals. So like he took apart a dimmer switch from his parents' living room and built in a dimmer switch into the amp so that way he could have it up to 10 but could dim it so that it was all the way open but yet not as loud. I mean, just the whole period of, like him and guy from Boston, Schultz, all those guys, it was like the late 70s were an interesting period. I think this is true maybe for like cars too, where it was the last time that you could figure out a car engine or an electrical system or whatever just because you sort of had a knack for how these things worked. And you could just take a phone apart, kind of put it back together and learn these things. Now that's impossible. Now you open up a car, like the only person who can work on your car is an actual mechanic because he's got to hook it into a computer that says everything, But it from like up until like the early part of the 80s, it seems as though this was still possible, that guys could sort of, or anyone, women too, could sort of become like natural experts in the construction of the instrument they were using. And then it created all the, and that's, like there's, like Van Halen would not be the band they were if not for his ability to sort of hook up wires and stuff like that,
People seem to think he might have been a genius in a lot of ways.
Who?
Eddie.
Well, in two ways for sure. Playing guitar, definitely, and then possibly designing guitars. But he's definitely a genius in one way.
Well, they're a band that YouTube has really helped them. Because it was right around the time when people started, bootleg videos and all that stuff. And there's stuff from the late 70s and early 80s that's on YouTube. It's just a great band. I would love to watch a documentary on those guys. Well,
it's tough to do because, they just don't like each other. And Van Halen's are like this book. He talks to Michael Anthony, is the only guy from the band he talks to. And really what Michael Anthony offers, it would almost bend to the author's advantage to skip him entirely, because it just seems like this weird thing where there's a few portions of this interview with the bass player, but
they shoved him out, right? Michael Anthony?
Now it's his son plays bass now. Eddie Van Halen's son plays bass. There's just a lot of very interesting details about Van Halen in general. The idea that like Eddie Van Halen would never record anything in the studio. He couldn't play live. So like when you hear the record, it's just him playing. Like it's not a ton of overdubs and all of these things, and so therefore when you see him live, he can actually do it. It just and then they got the vocalist who's like kind of the ultimate rock vocalist in every way except for the actual vocals.
Right.
Which so when you watch bootlegs of Van Halen, it's weird because it's like everything in between the songs is awesome, and the songs start and they're awesome, and then it's like, and then the song is over and it's awesome again.
Yeah, that is true. I don't know what the rankings would be for greatest vocalists, and then as it drops down. But just for pure pipes, he was way down there. He really was.
Yeah, I mean, and on the records, he's pretty good. Like, I think that he's a real, I think David Lee Roth is actually a real workaholic. And both his autobiography and this book and pretty much everything else about Van Halen, there's two sides to him. Sort of the side that makes it, where he expresses in public, where he almost tries to seem like, hey, I'm just happy to be here. I don't even know how I got here type thing. And then everything behind it. So I think he would work really, really hard in the studio to get one good take, and that would be it. But even, the Ted Templeman, the guy who produced all those records, when he started producing Van Halen, and this is in this book, he basically says that, even then he was like, I want to get Sammy Hagar in this band, because he had produced the band Montrose, which Sammy Hagar was the frontman for. So he had always, which is a weird, so from the very onset, they were like, there's going to be problems with the vocals. But on the records, there really isn't. I mean, it's because the lyrics also are pretty well written. I think that people overlook how kind of funny some of the Van Halen lyrics are. Yeah. And they're delivered in this stylized way that makes anyone else singing those songs seem wrong. Like, in many ways, he was a much more difficult vocalist to replace than a lot of other bands who might have tried the same thing, Yeah.
All right. I have to go pop 7 cold pills. Chuck, we'll check in with you maybe after Mad Men. Maybe after this goes. Maybe we'll just do a little special Mad Men. I actually think that the last 2 episodes are going to be good, but I'm interested to hear your thoughts. I'm looking forward to them, and they might be, and I think it will be, probably. It's unlikely there'll be some super satisfying conclusion, because that would sort of go against how the show has always worked, but, Yeah. All right. Thanks. As always,
okay.
A pleasure.
Bye-bye.
Talk to you soon.
Target percent off. Whoa.
Thank you for downloading the BS Report with Bill Simmons.
Too much fun.
Check out more podcasts at the iTunes Music Store or at Podcenter at ESPNradio.com.
Peace out.
Geico presents Strange Savings Stories. Astronomers detected an interstellar transmission. It stated, Geico, 15 minutes could save you 15% or more. The implications were staggering. Was the cosmos telling us we could all save hundreds on car insurance with Geico? Or did their radar merely pick up a signal from the nearby Rufus and Clyde's morning show? We may never know.
Geico. 15 minutes could save you 15% or more on car insurance.